Join the team at sport-social.co.uk.
Hello, welcome back to the FPL Masterclass. It's myself, Haider, and I'm joined by Rob as always. Please, guys, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button as well. We want to get this show out to all the brilliant FPL players. You can follow us on Twitter, and that's at TF Masterclass. You can also follow me as well at Haider_Rubbani, and you can follow Rob as well at _Rob_B. You probably are following Rob because he's got nearly 25,000 followers. But Rob, another FPL week. It was a good one for me. How about you?
It wasn't bad, considering the week before, I think everyone had a bad week and people were talking about changing wildcards and finding new players and different ways into marketplaces for those players to get more points. I was above the average this week. You know, you're going to see in a minute my game week 8 totals. And it was good. It was okay. You know, coming out of a wild card, I think it's a bit difficult at the moment, certainly with the main protagonist getting all the points. So we're talking like the Salahs, aren't we? You know, like people that get it every season. But then trying to find players who are going to be differentials this year, it's going to be tough to actually make changes that your own competitors in your FPL leagues are not also making themselves.
Yeah, it's a really tough one this year, Rob. I mean, look, Mo Salah is the person to captain, isn't he? Let's be honest. You'd be crazy to look beyond him otherwise. He's scoring against City. He's scoring against every single team in the league. And as you can see here, obviously, we've got your team up from last week. So let's sort of run through it now. You've got 61 points. You're above the average. I got about 60. So, you know, we both had good game weeks. And look, all your defense performed. Goalkeeper didn't perform. You got 2 points. But Trent, Cancelo, and Livramento all got 6 points. Foden was your pick to bring in this week. I also brought Foden in as well. He got an assist. Townsend only got 2, and Kovacic got 2. But Salah was fantastic, wasn't he? He got 13 points. You captained him, so you got 26. And then the front three didn't really perform when Timo Werner is out. And we are going to talk about what we're going to do with Lukaku and Werner not playing. But Rob, all in all, I'm looking at that bench, and you must be a little bit frustrated because, you know, there's a good 13 points sitting there that could have pushed you even higher up in the overall standings.
Look at that bench. So, yeah, you know, I did. Obviously, when you play the wild card, you can't play the bench boost. And I wanted to play the bench boost this week. I was like, I want those 4 players to get their points. As you can see, the way it went, Jota didn't feature anyway. He was obviously one of the guys that brought in on my wild card. Sanchez, again, getting his standard 6 points. Just seems to be like clockwork. Unfortunately, I went for Ramsdale because I thought Arsenal might get another clean sheet. Did they get another clean sheet? No, they didn't. But then you look at Cresswell, again, a guy who it's not really about clean sheets for him. He can assist. He'll get you those assists from set pieces. Banquillo, who was really my bench and stash, £4 million, got 4 points and an assist. So there's a good balance about that squad. And, you know, we're going to talk this week, as you said, about Timo Werner. Both Werner and Lukaku are injured. When you look at my points totals, there's 61. This is actually, it's not, you can't see it actually on the information there. But I actually went up about 50,000 places. So it shows that with the average of 49 points, which I always say the average is normally about 50, and you should be aiming for 60 as your average per week. And if you get 60, you will go up in the league. The game week rank there was only 1.2 million, which doesn't sound very good out of, 2.8 or something like that. But I still jumped up to about 250,000 when I was like 300,000 last week. So it shows that you can still make incremental gains in FPL as a league if you do it the right way and go kind of little and often and stick with the right players. So like for me, like you said, Salah there, it's just a no-brainer, isn't it? You just give him the captain's armband and let him run. But you look at my front three this week, Hwang was definitely a little bit more of a gamble. Antonio was disappointing. And Werner really, Werner's out. He's off. He's injured anyway. Hamstring injury just gives me a good excuse to make a change for one of the more elite Premier strikers in the game.
Yeah, I mean, let's go through some of those wildcard picks. You've mentioned the front three, and you brought in Wang and and Werner. So we're not going to talk about that, Rob. But let's talk about Phil Foden, because we had that discussion last week. I think that was a great shout. I was toying with Foden, Townsend, Doucouré. Doucouré is injured now for a little while, so I'm quite happy that I did bring in Foden. But you're looking at it now with Manchester City, they're really starting to hit some form. And Phil Foden's price is fantastic, but he's also someone I think who will see himself starting regularly. And he might be one of those players that's not as susceptible to Pep's roulette. And we saw with Ferran Torres out now, I'll be looking at Foden as probably the number one pick in that City midfield.
Yeah, there's always that chance with Phil Foden that he might play as the false nine. So I think that gives him extra value, certainly as a midfielder. There's always the chance as well that Gabriel Jesus could go more central, and that means that Foden would play further back. That's not really an issue. But you just saying there about Pep Roulette, I always say every year, City are that one team in FPL where all the protagonists that are, say, contributing to the Manchester City cause, even if they're on the bench, they still get you points. So Foden, I think, did play 90 minutes in that game. He got an assist. That's kind of like standards, what you want. Just going across the line then, just to mention Townsend, who was another one of the picks. Townsend had more attacking metrics than anyone else this week and only got 2 points. So for me, I feel good about that because I think he made something like 8 crosses into the box, which Everton failed to convert. But if he's putting those 8 crosses in, there's going to be weeks where he gets 1 assist, 2 assists, 3 assists, and consistency will come from his points.
Yeah, Townsend's a really intriguing one. I had Rafinha out, who I put him on the bench. Obviously, we said he wouldn't play probably because he travelled back from Brazil and he didn't play. And I was toying with the idea, and I'm still toying with the idea of Townsend. We'll have a little discussion later. Obviously, we'll look at the fixtures. But guys, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We need your support to grow this fantastic show. But Rob, let's move on now to sort of the burning question of today. And that is, well, Lukaku's out injured. Werner's out injured, as you mentioned just now. So what do you do? Now we're going to compare 2 players, aren't we? We're going to compare Jamie Vardy and we're going to compare Harry Kane. And some people are going to be thinking, Harry Kane, he scored 1 goal. Obviously, he broke his duck last week. But there is an argument, isn't there, for either player. So we'll start with Jamie Vardy. And just looking at his season, I mean, he's had a great season. I didn't actually realize how many goals he's scored. He's up there with Salah as the top scorer in the Premier League. 7 goals and the 1 assist. Leicester haven't been particularly good, but Jamie Vardy's been fantastic. You're looking at his form there. He's averaging 9 points per game. And look at him in terms of the ICT ranking. Influence is 2, threat is 2. He's up there with in the top 5. And he's not actually owned by that many of FPL players. You're looking at that 22%. I can imagine that's going to jump now with no Lukaku. But you haven't mentioned Ronaldo, have you? United's fixtures aren't great. We'll talk about that later. But why are you angling towards Jamie Vardy and Harry Kane?
Well, there's a kind of differential in the sense that when you look at these 2 players, they are perennial fixtures in FPL. So every year they get pretty good stats. You get to the end of the season and whether they have hot runs or kind of like they're a bit slower because their clubs have not done as well or something like that. Generally, these 2 guys will get numbers. So this week's show is really called, Vardy or Kane, because you're looking to fill that extra space. And last week we talked about Lukaku and the fixtures to come, and maybe being able to invest in another Chelsea player and to be able to save some money and put the money elsewhere. So when we did the wild card, I banked some money. So it leaves me now in a much more relaxed position. So I know Lukaku's not fit. I know that Timo Werner's not fit. So I'm going to look at the marketplace. You start with Vardy. Vardy is the number 1 striker in FPL. It's just simple as that. He's the best. He's top of the rankings. His ICT rankings are off the chart. As you said, they're 2nd for influence, 9th for creativity, 2nd for threat. That's what I'm really looking at. Overall index ranking of 2. I think last week we talked about the number 1 ranking player, and that was Trent Alexander-Arnold. So with Vardy, the thing with Leicester City is that Vardy plays, and Vardy's the striker. And if there's ever the time that they go 4-2-3-1, it's Vardy. So you're okay with that. I think we also saw that Leicester against Manchester United are playing their way into a bit of form. If Vardy can hit those numbers when Leicester are not that great, you would expect that his numbers will increase even going forward. So as you said there, kind of the ownership of around like 22%, across the league shows how FPL can be a fashionable game. So people look at Jamie Vardy, he's not as fashionable as Ronaldo. And of course, United fans are going to want Ronaldo in there. Cristiano scores in the Champions League. He has his big moment. I guarantee you there are a load of FPL players this week who might not have him, who will be scurrying to buy Ronaldo. But as we're going to talk about later on, Manchester United's fixtures for the next 5 are not very good. Doesn't mean Ronaldo won't score, but it does mean that other strikers might be better looks for you this season as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, get your questions in as well. We will answer them at the end. So, yeah, make sure you get them in. Rob, we're going to start talking about Harry Kane, and a lot of people are going to laugh at Harry Kane. Obviously, we had a discussion in the past about Harry Kane in terms of I'm not too sure when I look at the way that Spurs play under Nuno as well. I don't think he'll get as many chances. But they looked decent against Newcastle. Newcastle aren't the greatest side in the world, but he got his first goal. He got his first assist. As you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Kane and Vardy are perennial FPL players. You always, if you wanted to win your league, you'd have one of those two in your team. And you just saw before, Kane scored 23 goals, 14 assists last season. Incredible numbers. Vardy had 23 goals 2 seasons ago. So looking at it here, I think there's a bit of a risk here. I know that he's obviously hit some form of late. He got 12 points in the last game week. But you're looking at the ICT ranking. He is quite low. He hasn't been particularly good. I don't think Spurs are a particularly expansive and progressive side. But looking at how much he's owned by, 5.6% out of the FPL players, that is a major differential, isn't it? And if you can actually, let's say, get Kane performing, or if he does perform, you can see yourself shooting up your leagues.
You could do, and this is the gamble. So this is why we wanted to talk about Vardy and Kane, because so we know what Harry Kane is and what he does. Really, what the decision here is what Spurs going to do now in the weeks ahead. Because if Spurs start playing well, and I think there are signs that they've started to get it together a little bit. I think you see that Son's ticking a little bit more, and I think that helps Kane, and they definitely. You just say in the ICT rankings, this is a Harry Kane supposedly out of form. He's still 18th for influence. That's just not actually that bad for a player who's supposedly not playing well. When you look to his game-to-game stats, obviously he missed the first 2 games of the season, looked like he was leaving Tottenham. But he's now had 6 games of playing 90 minutes. So again, it tells you that he's going to play the full set of minutes. And against Newcastle, he looked really, really good. So I think that Harry Kane is ready to start his season. We're now at the point where you have to say, what will Harry Kane do? Do you want to spend 12.1 million as your super premium price to go and get a striker? Or do you go with Jamie Vardy, who's only 10.6? And I think 10.6 sounds like a big number, but in FPL terms for, maybe the top ranking striker, which is what Vardy is, it does represent some kind of value. In the same way that I think last year, Son being around the 10 million mark gave you real extra value in midfield when the Salahs and the Manes were 11s upwards up to 12. That extra 2 million can be used in other parts of the pitch, and I always say this. So I look at Harry Kane, and I think it's about, can you get him in your side without losing points, without maybe hemorrhaging? And I think that's also part of the problem, because you would probably have to downgrade, say, a member of your strike force or your midfield or even one of your main defenders just to get those extra few pennies to get Harry Kane in. But what we'll do is we'll kind of look at the 2 options for my team, because, as I said, I need a striker. Werner needs to go. He's injured. And it's which one do I go for? But there's also a whole glut of strikers at the moment that are just on the up.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. We're going to have a look at what your squad will look like with Jamie Vardy. And you haven't really changed very much else, have you? You've kept what you've kept, and there's a nice balance to the squad. You've got your 2 goalkeeper rotations, but how much are you banking if you bring in Jamie Vardy? It's actually quite staggering, at 10.6, and you're thinking about it, he's got the same amount of goals as Salah as well.
Yeah.
Vardy's actually very good value for money. You're looking at how expensive Ronaldo is. Lukaku's a million cheaper. Kane, you've mentioned, is about 1.5 million more expensive. So actually looking at that and looking at the balance of that squad, I think it looks really good with Jamie Vardy there.
Yeah, for me, we'll look in a second at the Kane option when we go through this slide, first one here. I think Vardy at 10.6 still gives me about 1.2, 1.3 million pound in the bank. So that means something to me, because I made my wild card last week. Obviously, I've used that up. I've decided this week, obviously, that Werner can't stay because he's injured. He might be out for a week or two or whatnot. So I'm bringing in a striker. I think when you look at Vardy at 10.6 and then you look at having that extra money in the bank, it means that next week, if I'm, for instance, not happy with Jota, and there is an issue with Jota, I think now with the way that Firmino played the other day, you might see that Jota gets much more kind of smaller minutes rather than what we were saying only just a week ago. Then I could make that change and actually upgrade Jota for an £8 or £9 million player. And there's lots of good midfielders in that rank. And I would then still have Vardy in my pocket. There's other two players that we talked about there in terms of budget, in Kovacic and Townsend. Again, if I didn't like what they were doing this week and they got injured or something like that, I have the ability to upgrade. So if we jump onto the next slide, because this is what you would do to get Harry Kane in, and this is what I would have to do, is that to get Kane in my team, even I think with £2.6 million in my bank account, I would have to get rid of Jota. So I would be able to lose Jota for probably, I think, Rafinha would be the best option, 6.6. Rafinha, as you said, didn't play for Leeds last week, but we know that was to do with the international break. And when you look at Rafinha's form, it's really good for the season. I think he's got 3 goals from the centre of midfield. So, he's doing what he does for Leeds United. That then allows you to play Harry Kane up top. I would then have Antonio and Hwang. Hwang would probably be on my bench out of that selection there. But it is a gamble. There's no doubt about it. And I think, again, Spurs fans might be feeling good about Son and Kane and trying to get those two players, shoehorn them into their team. This year with FPL, and I think I've said this to you before, I think I said to you at the start of the season, your strikers don't really win you FPL. They just don't. They don't get you the big enough numbers at the end of the season. There might be 1 or 2, but the kind of mid-range guys don't really perform. In the first kind of 8-9 weeks of FPL, and we're going to look in a second at the numbers, there's a whole host of strikers that are really putting in what I would call last year's Bamford numbers. So Bamford came into the league last year, performed brilliantly, and he was a differential. So even if you didn't go for Harry Kane, even if you didn't go for Jamie Vardy, there's a ton of strikers out there who look really good.
Rob, there's a question here saying, have you taken the -4 hit you have for this team, but for the previous team you didn't to bring Vardy in? So bring Vardy in, so for Vardy, it's a free transfer, isn't it?
Totally. So that is the other benefit, is that if you bring in Vardy, I think the big benefit for Kane is that Spurs' run of games gets better now over the next kind of 10 weeks. So that, they have those traditional fixtures where you would expect Kane to score. Jamie Vardy just seems to be scoring against everyone. So that's the other side of it. If he's the only striker up top in a 4-2-3-1, he's going to get fed. He's going to be in the box, which is what he always does. He leads the press. And he's getting those kind of, again, traditional Jamie Vardy numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, I'm going to ask you a quick question regarding Lukaku, because a lot of us banked on bringing Lukaku with the wild cards that we did, because you looked at Chelsea's fixtures and you can obviously see them here. Chelsea have got the nicest, second best. So if you're listening to this on audio, what we do have on the screen is actually from the FPL Scout, and it's the fixtures, the next 4 fixtures for the teams, and it's from the top is the team with the easiest one, and the bottom is the team with the hardest one. So you look at Manchester United sitting at the bottom, Rob. We'll address that a little bit later, but looking at Lukaku, I'm a little bit disappointed from what I've seen from Lukaku. He hasn't really provided me any returns since I brought him in, Rob, to be honest. I brought him in game week 7, I think. So I know it's only been 2 game weeks, or game week 6, but still I'm just a bit disappointed. And I'm looking at the other options that you can see here. So you're looking at the top. Vardy's the best scoring one. Antonio second. Jesus is an interesting one. Let's talk about Gabriel Jesus. And let's kind of link that to Lukaku as well, because you expected Lukaku to come in and hit 25 to 30 goals a season, but it hasn't really happened for him. And now that he's injured, there are better options than him, aren't there, for less money and better form.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people in the FPL community go along the lines that if they've got Lukaku, they're just going to bench him for a week because it doesn't look like a serious injury, and that he would then be back to take advantage of Chelsea's poor run of fixtures going forward. And you can see it on this graph here, Chelsea are second in terms of having the best set of fixtures going forward there. Norwich, which obviously he will miss, but then they've got Newcastle, Burnley and Leicester. So it's a decent run. But when you look at Gabriel Jesus, I always look at this as price differential. So 8.6 million, what are you getting for that money? Well, Jesus can play as the 9, but the reason why he's got 41 points this year is because he's not playing as the 9. He's not having to do any of the kind of dog's work. He is now playing to the wide of the front men. So he's playing in not a winger's position, but a position where he can get in the box, in the channel, and he can find his way in, kind of what you would call the Jadon Sancho role, that in that kind of area of the pitch. And he even said
the Mason role as well, Rob.
Yeah,
he said similar.
Yeah, it's in terms of being on that part of the football pitch. So, we just talked about Phil Foden. There's every chance that Foden plays as a false 9 and Jesus carries on to the side of the attack. But of course, if Torres is out or not available, you might see Jesus go narrow. But he's got 41 points from 8.6, and that is already 10 points more than Lukaku. So at this stage of the season, I think anyone benching Lukaku to bring him back in for the next lot of fixtures is misguided. There's too many strikers who are hot or getting hotter, heating up. And on that list, literally everyone on that list we're looking at here is heating up to an element. We're going to go through them. But you can even look at someone like Edouard right at the bottom there, 6.5 million, got 24 points. Looks really good at Crystal Palace. Palace look like they're going to attack this year. Go up the top of the list, like you said, up to Jesus. You see there's St. Maximin, what he's doing at Newcastle riding on crest of a wave. Danny Ings, who we talked about last week, who I binned and got rid of. What did he go and do? He went and scored.
I thought about Thanks, you, Rob,
Danny.
That happened.
So I knew that would happen. I knew it would happen because he's not a player that's going to not score over a period of time. I think he had 4 games of outscoring or 5 games of outscoring, but he was still contributing. His ICT rankings were still pretty good. But you can flick all the way down the list. I think the interesting one there in terms of premiums or close to being a premium is Aubameyang at 9.9 because Arsenal have got a run of fixtures coming up of Villa, Leicester, Watford and Liverpool. So we take the Liverpool one out there. You still think those next 3 that Aubameyang, if Arsenal play well, he's going to benefit. Kind of risky at 9.9. It's almost premium. But then you look at Firmino, 8.8. He got a hat-trick the other day. Jimenez is definitely coming back into form now after his injury. And then you've got super cheap in Dennis at 5.2, who has, let me just work that out very quickly, looking at it's a kind of 5-point difference to Lukaku, but a £7 million difference. So I would not be sitting on Lukaku this week just to see what happens. I think you need to sell him, get rid, and at least bank the money and bring in another striker and give it a go. Because if you bank the money and Lukaku comes back in next week and you feel like he's going to pop, then of course you can go back and buy him again.
Rob, I think the staggering thing is Cristiano Ronaldo's not on that list.
That's right. That's why I wouldn't buy him. So that's the thing with Cristiano is it's not. We talked about this before, didn't we? About real world football and FPL football. So no doubt in years gone by, Cristiano Ronaldo, when he was at Manchester United, was the most lethal FPL footballer of all time because he got goals and assists like it was raining. That's what he was. I'm not saying he's not going to score 20 goals this season, and he will definitely jump up these rankings. What I'm saying is there are other players in a much better price range that will then allow you to go and buy better midfielders and better defenders. And that does mean something. Like you saw my team last week, my 3 strikers didn't do anything, but I had 3 centre-backs or 3 defenders, 6 points, 6.6 points. So that's as good as 3 strikers get me 6.6 points. That's the balance. So you look at someone here like Brentford are coming up. We're going to talk about them in a second. Tony is kind of 7th in the ranking list in there, 6.4 million. Lots of people went for him early on and then binned him off and said,
I kept him, Rob, and I've actually been rewarded for keeping him in. I was going to bin him, but I thought, you know what, at 6.4 million and the way Brentford are playing, I was like, you know what, he's gonna get some contributions, and he has. Look, he's been a really good investment for me in my squad.
And that's why you should never over tinker. So don't be a Claudio Ranieri. Don't be a tinker man. Yeah. Look at the way where you can make quick kills. And if you see that there are players who are suddenly bursting into form at a good price category, and you can take advantage of that. But I think the striker category is really interesting this year, because I think when you look at Vardy at 56 points and Tony then at 50, there's a little bit of a drop off. You like Jesus is there, but Jesus gets 2 goals this week. And Jesus is going to be right up there. Yeah. So if you can get in early on one of these players, even Danny Ings say gets a hat-trick this week. I sold him last week. He's suddenly right at the top. you can make that now. If you have a little bit of kind of guesswork going on with the analytics, you can find a really good player in this bunch here just on the screen.
Rob, a name that's not on the list, and we'll talk about Edouard in a minute. He's at the bottom, and Palace have got some really good fixtures. Palace, actually, let's talk about him now. Let's talk about Edouard, and then I'll bring up a player that's in the comments. Palace have really shocked me this season. Watch, Rob. It hasn't been said for a long time. Obviously, they were under Roy for a very, very considerable amount of time, and they weren't the greatest side to watch. But Palace have been a great watch, and Edouard now, I mean, he's only 6.5 million. He had a great debut against Spurs. He scored again at the other North London club, Arsenal. Is he now an option? A lot of people have Conor Gallagher, and he's a really talented player as well, and he's given some great returns early on in the season. But would you be gambling on someone like Edouard, or would you be looking more at Jimenez, who's about 1.1 million more? I think Jimenez is going to start to explode. If I'm honest with you, I think he's a player definitely that I'll be keeping an eye on. But I'm leaning towards Vardy this week, I think, and I'm looking at Leicester's fixture against Brentford. Brentford are a brilliant side, but I think Leicester have got some. I think they're going to start hitting some form.
If I was playing my wild card this week, I would put Edouard in because I think that Palace seem to be onto something. The style of play is really, really good. It is forward thinking. I think they'll probably lose games because they're not maybe as defensively minded as last year, but I think they'll also score goals, and that's really all you care about with your striker. So when you look at Edouard at 6.5 million, that's also 24 points, not from a full total of 8 games because he came in a little bit later. I think he must have missed the first 2 games, and I think he only came off the bench for the next 2 games when he came in. So that was 4 games that he didn't start. So he's got 24 points from a much smaller kind of sample size. So that's a promising sign. And I think when you look at someone like Dennis at 5.2, we talk a lot also about bench and stash, don't we? At 5.2, if you wanted a striker to bench and stash because you went bigger in your midfield, say you went for Son in the 10 millions, you could go and get Dennis for 5.2, put him at the end of your bench, and he's still going to get you points. He's got 26 points this year. So that's still not, as I said, that's 11 points behind Danny Ings. So these are very kind of small gaps. It's about looking at fixtures to come, and that's how you decide which play you go for, because I think the fixtures that are moving ahead are the ones that will help you have a strategy to keep maybe players in your team for maybe 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, as opposed to what I've had to do with Lukaku and now obviously with Werner, where we've only kept them for 1 or 2 because the form ends up being bad, or Chelsea end up getting injuries and having to change things around.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, I'm going to bring in a wildcard name. He's scored 5 goals in 2 games in all competitions. You know who I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about this man, Patson Daca. Scored against Manchester United, scored 4 in the Europa League as well. He's an interesting option. I'm not sure if he's going to start, though. That's the only thing. I mean, it seems it's going to be Iheanacho and Vardy, but he would be a great differential with him. I'm not sure how much he's actually valued at. You might know, but if anyone does know in the comments, please do share that.
I looked at him and he's kind of mid-7s. So for me, too expensive. So if there's a player that is not even going to play or is just on the peripheral, then I think looking at Leicester City, you just named the 2 strikers that will go with. Daca will play and Daca will get goals. But the problem is when. So if you do it this week and you get a big fat 0, and next week he gets a big fat 0, and then he comes on for 10 minutes and gets you 1 point, for that kind of price range, mid-7s, I'm just not doing it. I don't mind if Dennis did that at 5.2 million, but I think Daca is someone that you need to maybe keep on your watch lists, have a look to see how he plays over, say, between now and Christmas, and then he might start to represent value, because if he does play games, say, for instance, Jamie Vardy gets injured, something like that happens, Daca's going to play, then he might explode and suddenly be a very, very good budget option.
Absolutely. Rob, let's talk about Brentford. Looking at their fixtures on the graphic, the next 4 games, I mean, they've come out top with the nicest fixtures. Leicester will be a bit of a challenge for them, but then they've got Burnley, Norwich, and Newcastle, all teams who you could argue are probably going to be fighting for relegation. So what are you thinking? Because I'm looking at Mbumo as well, who's been a really good option. And then I'm thinking about the goalkeeper as well, Raya. Are there any other players that you would be looking to buy in for Brentford as well?
I think the thing is with Brentford is when you look at their form and what they have been doing, they look like a team that are going to drive up the pitch. So when you're looking at that, fullbacks, attacking midfielders and strikers, I think it's interesting to talk about Tony here, because I know we just touched on him a second ago, but it's about which one of those forward players, you said you talked about Mbomo there, which one is going to really benefit from the fixtures that are to come. So when you look at what they've got there, they're top obviously of this list here in terms of next four: Leicester, Burnley, Norwich, and Newcastle. Especially the Norwich one. I don't know if you noticed the top four there; they've all got Norwich in it. So it seems to be anyone who's got Norwich in them is in that kind of, do I need to go and buy that striker that's playing Norwich this week? I think that's where Tony could really benefit. Is that if he's playing teams that are a little bit more Championship than Premier League, and obviously he did very well last year in the Championship, then that might be the time to kind of bring him in, even as a short-term option. Kind of again at 6.4 million, it's just not a lot of money. It means that you can rejig stuff elsewhere, and down from Jesus all the way, they're all pretty good value into, barring maybe Aubameyang and Lukaku. You've got some really good players in there that wouldn't break the bank. So I think with Brentford, I haven't invested in Brentford this week, but I think if you're doing a wild card, there's every chance of looking at the next four that you might bring in one or even two.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about the other team, Rob, that's sitting top of that table for the most favourable fixtures. And that is Chelsea. And they've got Norwich, as you mentioned, Newcastle, Burnley, same pretty much as Brentford. Well, it is the same fixtures as Brentford, actually. They've got Leicester. It's just the other way around. So, they've got some really nice fixtures. I'm going to bring up this question before. We will talk about Kai Havertz, Rob, but question here saying thoughts on Alonso. Seems he's now second choice to Chilwell. That is so frustrating for me because as soon as I brought him in with my wild card, Chilwell's played the last 2 weeks in the Premier League and scored 2 goals. The thing is, what's going to happen is you go and take out. We need to see who played midweek for Chelsea. That's really important. See who played against Malmo, and then you'll probably have an idea. But knowing my luck, I'll go and take him out, bring Chilwell in, and then next thing you know, Alonso's back to starting. But Chelsea are a bit of a strange one because they're not getting a lot of points. They're not scoring a lot of goals. They're getting points, they're getting victories, but I'm just looking at their side now. Who really are you going to be bringing in? We're going to mention Havertz as a false 9. But now with no Lukaku, no Werner, you could argue maybe Chilwell is a good option for them. Maybe one of the defenders like Thiago Silva. I've got Kovacic, but I'm not really going to go big on Chelsea like I thought I would be doing during this run of games.
Yeah, and this was the whole factor about the Lukaku-Werner differential about, how could you still buy into that market to make sure you utilize what Chelsea would potentially do without maybe spending too much money, if you were going to go premium on Lukaku. And obviously, I explained that last week about why I bought Werner. Fast forward 7 days, football is a very funny game. Things can change very, very quickly. You look at Chelsea in that run, Norwich, as we just talked about, being the whipping boys of the Premier League, I think. But then you've got 2 teams in there that maybe even just a week or 2 ago would have looked like potential defeats on the for those teams with Chelsea coming to town. Newcastle are in a different world now. So there's a kind of new confidence about them. Why is that? Because they're the richest club in the world. And then you look at Leicester, who again, a week ago before playing blessed Manchester United, looked like a team who was struggling a little bit, suddenly looked like a team that are up for it. So that run of 4 is not as good as maybe it was 7 days ago. So what do you do? I agree with what you said about Chelsea, about how you buy in. With the problem with Alonso and Chilwell, with the fact that I think they will get rotated all season long, I don't think anyone will be able to really predict who plays out of those 2. You might have one, and then they'll play 1 week, and the next week they won't even be on the bench. So that's an issue. So stay away from Alonso and stay away from Chilwell. Even on the other side of the pitch for Chelsea, with Reece James coming back, it's just a roll of a dice. So if that's how it is, then you're better off sticking with someone a bit more boring like Azpilicueta. So get Azpilicueta for around 6 million quid, get his clean sheets, and he does get the odd goal, he does get the odd assist, he does play wide now and then. So do that to stick with him. But I think with the front line with Chelsea, it's a problem because Chelsea actually only have 2 strikers registered in FPL. And they're the 2 we just said are not available, Lukaku and Werner. So they're going to have to play a false 9. It means that someone's going to have to come in from the midfield and play up top. And as we again said last week, Kai Havertz was the guy from last season who finished the season playing the false 9. It looked like that's what was going to happen this year. Lukaku comes, Kai Havertz never plays false 9 ever again. And here we are. He's probably going to do it now. He's probably going to be the guy up the top. So that could be a shrewd buy-in. He's still not particularly budget. He's still a relatively mid-range player. It's going to cost you money. But would I prefer Havertz at the moment or Foden? I'm going with Foden. Would I like Havertz or Jota? Well, maybe Havertz now. That's the kind of, I think, question that FPL managers are going to have to ask themselves about who's going to get them returns long term. It could be a case here that Lukaku's back next week, and then this whole false nine thing just falls apart. Yeah, it doesn't happen again. You don't see Havertz playing at the top end of the pitch, and Lukaku comes back in for the Newcastle match, scores a hat-trick, and everyone's trying to buy Romelu Lukaku again.
It's funny how quickly things change just in the space of a week in football. Rob, let's move on to just before we close now. We're going to talk about City, Liverpool, and United. They've all got very tough next 4 or 5 fixtures. We're looking at Manchester United, they're sitting there at the bottom of this graphic. They've got the hardest fixtures out of any team in the Premier League. We know this already as Manchester United fans, Rob. We're not looking forward to it. We've got Liverpool, who are the informed team in the league. Then you got Tottenham. Then you got Manchester City. Then you got Watford. And then you're also looking at Liverpool. They've got United, Brighton, West Ham, and Arsenal. So that's a fairly difficult run of fixtures. And City have got Brighton as well, Palace, Manchester United, and they've got Everton. So, looking at those sort of fixtures for Liverpool, I mean, what do you think about Trent as well? I'm actually quite intrigued because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, right, what am I going to do with Alonso? What am I going to do with Lukaku? I think I'm going to go and take Alonso out this week. Maybe I'll do that. That's what I'm toying with. Or do I decide to bench him and put in Livramento because I don't really want to take the -4 hit. So I've got Livramento already sitting on the bench. They're playing Burnley. But yeah, what are you thinking with Trent as well? Because Trent's obviously a player who is the most effective and probably the most influential in FPL right now. He is playing Manchester United, though. He is probably going to be against Marcus Rashford, who's had the advantage over him in previous fixtures. So, is it a case of you're just going to bench Trent, or are you still going to play him against this shaky Manchester United side?
I'm playing him in all 4 of those games. Yeah, Trent Alexander-Arnold is the #1 player in FPL in the ICT rankings. So again, there's some players, like we talked about this with Salah, didn't we? And we said it at the start of the season, we said it last week, and we've just said it this week. It doesn't really matter who they're playing. Just going to get numbers. So I think when you look at Trent, you look at Manchester United, who are pretty useless in the wide areas at times and are not at all on form at the moment. It doesn't kind of worry me in terms of saying, I'm going to put Trent on my bench. I certainly think that Trent is still more viable than, say, Alonso or Chilwell, because with those two, you just don't know. You do at least know he's going to play. He's not going to get dropped for Liverpool, is he? But then you look at the next fixtures, and you look at, say, Brighton, who have played really well this season. Again, we just talked about Sanchez in goal. But that might be, again, where Liverpool can exploit a team that maybe are less defensively mobile. West Ham are coming into a really bad run of games again. And then you look at Arsenal, who are just a complete Jekyll and Hyde side. I don't look at that 4 as a particularly bad 4 for Liverpool players. I think it might be the case that you don't go and buy new Liverpool players. You might stick with what you've got. You might, like as I said, I've got Salah, I've got Jota, and I've got Trent. I will stick with those guys for now. The guy who's on the peripheral is Jota, because I'm not sure what he's going to do with Firmino. But there's every chance that Firmino plays 60 minutes against United, Jota plays 30 minutes and scores 2 goals. It's just the way it goes. So it's just the balance, really, of the team. I think, again, with City, I don't think Brighton, Palace, United, Everton is particularly too much of a hard gig for them. I think they can do that. United's run, ironically, and we're United fans, obviously, Liverpool, Tottenham, City, Watford, you'll probably find they'll win those first 3 and then lose to Watford. So it's you can't really predict those things with United as it goes this season.
I think, for the first time, Rob, usually when we're around the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, I think, Man United they'll win the harder games, won't they? They won't win the easy ones, but I think this time, it's going to be difficult. And I'm dreading these games coming up. I'm not touching any Man United players, but I am actually considering Trent this weekend. He's one of my options. I think it's between Trent, Azpilicueta, or I actually just don't take the hit. I just make my free transfer with Vardy coming in for Lukaku, and then I do it next week, when I've got a bit of money in the bank. I've really got about 1.5 million. But Rob, look, thanks for joining me as always. Guys, make sure you hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, retweet as well if you see this on Twitter. We'd love to get more people involved in this FPL show. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, and that's at TF Masterclass. Follow myself as well at Haider_Rubbani, and follow Rob as well at _Rob_B. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.